On June 12th and 13th, our Grading for Learning Committee met in order to take a look at current grading practices and look at best practices in grading, and also review district data. And we also had an opportunity to view a video presentation by Ken O'Connor and a Skype session with grading expert Rick Wormley. Some of the day one highlights from Ken O'Connor were that he mentioned we've made school a grading game and not a learning game. The primary purpose of grades is to communicate student achievement, and faulty grading damages teachers and students. In this instance, specifically, we have a report card example of why the 100-point scale has a lot of error. We talked about an example where a student had 10 grades and 1 low grade, and that low grade dropped the overall grade down for that student by 2 letter grades. So we'll have more conversation about our grading scale and what needs to be refined with that. Also, continuing on for day one, Ken O'Connor mentioned that behaviors are important but should be reported out separately on the report card. Penalties for late work distort achievement and won't change student behavior. We have instances of this both at the middle and high school of teachers have explained that they've tried to give penalties for both behavior and late work penalties, and that has not changed student behavior. So we'll take a look further into that. Also, zeros distort student achievement and reduce motivation of students, and grades should be accurate, meaningful, consistent, and supportive of learning. Also on day one, we looked at our 14 essential questions that really focused our work for the 2 days, and we worked in committee groups of elementary, middle, and high school teachers and parents and also administrators, and used the work of many grading experts. We ended up drafting summary position statements for the areas that you see listed on the screen as well. And you can view all of our work on the Grading for Learning website. On day two, we looked at data analysis, and on this day we examined the teacher grading survey responses and compared that to the best practices in research. We also reviewed current assessment practices, and we finally concluded that there's great variance in practices. Some of the highlights from the teacher survey you can see on the screen, and we have support for those, also evidence from best practices on things that we need to refine. We also took highlights from the teacher survey at the middle school level. You can see on the screen the results from some of the highlights from the survey, as well as the best practices evidence listed underneath each of those pieces of data. And then finally we had highlights from the teacher survey at the high school level, where we did the same. We found 3 data points and specifically here, and then reported out what the best practices would be. On day two, we had an opportunity to Skype with grading expert Rick Wormley, and he had some points to make. He talked about the more you aggregate into a symbol or a grade, the less accurate it is. He also mentioned that it would take until grade 22 to teach everything, so we must decide which standards we need to focus on. And also, true professionals need to be able to explain what they do. Also, continuing on from day two, Rick Wormley said, "My thoughts on when you don't allow late work to be turned in when you die." He thought that this was so important that if you're going to assign something to a student and it focuses on standards and benchmarks and it's important enough for them to complete, then they do need to turn that in. He also talked about a 0 does not teach, and then also the more accurate grades, more accuracy in grades with the standards-based approach. What do we need to do in terms of looking back and also looking ahead? We really can't dwell back on the feedback from the previous slides, but we do need to use it for true reflection. What we need to do is we need to refine what we're doing in terms of our grading practices and take a look at what the best practices show us, And many of us haven't had the opportunity to do that until now because as a district we haven't focused on this. And we'll use this year as an opportunity to try out some new best practices in grading. So what's next? You'll have time with your building principal and school teams to take a look at research and best practices throughout this school year, and we'll look to implement practices in the following school year in 2013-2014. All teachers will hear from grading expert Rick Wormley on September 26th and also be able to work with him on questions about grading practices. And then finally, what can you do to find out more? Be sure to check out the grading website. There's also a link on that page for feedback, so you can provide feedback to the Grading Practices Committee for questions that you might have that you need more clarification on. And then if you would like to try some of the practices mentioned by your principal or one of the committee members, please be sure to see one of the committee members or your principal to talk about how you could implement those practices. Teachers will also have monthly 1-hour staff development meetings with their building principal and Grading for Learning team members. So what is the moral imperative? A moral imperative is defined as something that must happen because it's the right thing. And this deals with grading practices. We need to refine our approach to grading practices because we need to do what's best for us as educators, as professionals, and ultimately what is best for our students as learners.